Hey everyone, and welcome to this month's live event for National Quilter Circle. We once again have Susan Guzman back with us today. So thank you so much for being here, Susan.
Absolutely. Great to see you.
Good. Well, so if somebody is new to watching or they didn't watch last month and haven't seen any of our Facebook posts, we want to introduce you because you are our host for our next upcoming block challenge. So I want you to just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Well, let's see. Oh, wow. That was out of my field, Ashley.
I know.
Um, I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about quilting. I have been in quilting since, let's see, I have to remember now, 2004, 5 is when I first started getting into quilting. And I joined an online quilt guild. And that's where I sort of picked up all of my skills. I'm a self-taught quilter. Um, and I ran a business for since about 2006-7 was when I started my business, a pattern business, and then I got into writing and editing. I eventually took on the position of editor-in-chief for McCall's Quilting, and that was really fun. I really loved my job. And I'm back to designing and writing and editing.
That's perfect. And we're lucky enough to have you have designed a quilt for us. So if you want to just maybe preview a little bit of the quilt that we're going to be, I guess, launching on the 24th, and that's the Lexington sampler quilt. I know you have it with you, so you don't have to show it just yet if you don't want, but maybe just explain a little bit about what is going to be learned, I guess, while you're making this quilt.
Well, there's a lot of different things that we're going to learn, but in particular, what can be challenging to some quilters is working with blocks that are on point. We're going to work with, if anyone has seen the quilt, we're going to be working with the center of the quilt that's going to be on point. And what becomes a challenge, or what people can become sort of intimidated by, is the setting triangles that sort of fit everything together in the center. And we'll go through that, and it really is a lot easier than anyone thinks.
Perfect. Well, I just want to remind anybody, if they're just joining us, that you can submit your questions for Susan to answer by typing those into the comment section below the video. We'll be live for about the next hour, so we'll have plenty of time to work our way through some of those questions. But so back to the layout being on point, the reason that it's difficult is because you're going to end up with pieces cut on the bias, correct?
Exactly.
And what makes that challenging?
Well, it can be challenging because when you cut on the bias, if you've never done that before, just take a small swatch of fabric, cut it on the diagonal, where the warp and the weft are on your fabric. You want to cut it on the diagonal. And if you cut that, just sort of play around with it, and you can see that there's a lot of movement with those threads, because it's almost like you're opening up a flower, and you can pull those apart, and it can become very distorted. And so it's really is, you just have to sort of treat those edges very gently. And I'll give tips on how to pin those in place, and how to give you the best opportunity to begin with to get the best result.
I'm going to come back to pinning in a second because I have a question about that. But is there, so say you're working with a bias cut fabric and you do stretch it, can you stretch it too much, like beyond use? And if so, like, how do you know when you just can't use it and you need to cut a new piece, or can you maybe ease things back together?
I've never really been able to. I've just always been real careful with any of my bias cuts. And I don't want to scare anyone away either. You cut them, you set them aside, and just don't even touch them.
Well, until you put them together.
Until you need them, right, yeah. Until you need them. And then I can kind of walk through at the time when I'll be doing videos once a week. And the week that we're piecing the center, it'll be week 8. I'll go over that and just sort of touch on how to actually, and maybe what I'll do is I'll have some examples, just like smaller examples, and I'll show you and direct you how to center it all and pin it all together, and how it should be laid out before you put it through the your sewing machine to sew the pieces together. So I'll cover all of that.
Perfect. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a question about pinning. And so last month we kind of had a question. I don't want to call it a taboo question, but it's kind of one of those subjects that people feel very strongly about, and that was the pre-washing or not pre-washing topic. And so this month I'm going to ask you, do you or have you ever sewn over pins?
Yes, I have.
And so that's one of those things where people either are okay with it or they absolutely don't do it. So I guess, what is your stance on that and why?
Well, I always take my pins out before they go under the presser foot, but early sewing, I may have missed some. And I would say if you don't take them out, you run the risk of damaging your needle, your sewing machine needle, breaking it. And then I don't know. It's just best to take them out. Just best to take them out.
So I feel like that's usually everybody's response. And I grew up, I never removed a single pin. My mom probably still doesn't remove pins either. We both that's just what we've always done. And knock on wood, we've never had a single problem. No,
Good.
no machine issues. So I don't know if we're just the luckiest people or our time's coming. One of the two.
I think that's pretty cool. Well, I have put my my pinned pieces underneath the presser foot and past the needle where I didn't get it. Mm-hmm. And I just would kind of, to myself go, wow, I made it.
It's like you're winning the lottery every time.
Exactly. Right. Well, I think that's really interesting that you don't take them out. So was your mom taught that way? Do you know?
She was pretty much, I would say, more self-taught also. And we both have a garment sewing background, so I don't know if maybe it's different because you have maybe more complicated pieces. You're fitting a sleeve in. Maybe there's more reason to get either right up to a pin or go right over it or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. That's just, like I said, that's just how we've always done it. But
well, I think that's pretty cool, Ashley. That's something to be proud of.
Well, I don't know if we should go that far, but maybe. All right, we have a question here. This is from Lessa, and she says, is this quilt going to be the entire quilt pattern, including sashing and binding? I am so excited to get started.
Yes, we're going to do the entire quilt. You're actually going to have a choice of making a throw size or the bed size quilt. And what I mean by bed size is, it's usually when we say bed size, it's a pretty general size. It's going to be 88.5 square. Essentially, we're all going to be doing the same pattern until through week 8. Week 8 is when we piece the entire center and the very first border, and that's going to be the throw size. And then in week 9, we're going to go ahead and finish up all of the border pieces, and then piece the borders onto the quilt center. And you'll also have finishing instructions. I don't go into putting binding on, but I believe, Ashley, National Quilter Circle has videos, correct?
We have so many videos on binding, different types of binding, French fold binding, double fold, all that. So we will definitely, once we get to that point, if anyone has any questions about that, we can definitely post some of the tutorials that we have on binding straight to the Facebook page. Or if you're familiar with the website, you can go to the top tabs at the tabs at the top, and we do have a section on binding and finishing. So you can find them there as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's great.
All right. Noelle would like to know, can you use a fusible stabilizer to prevent bias distortion?
You sure can. I mean, that's a great idea. I've never used it, but absolutely you could.
Would you pick a fusible stabilizer over something like starch? I know we talked a little bit about starch previously.
Yeah, it's funny that you bring that up because I was going to mention that next. I was going to say, there is this trend going on right now where individuals are pre-washing their fabrics, and I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but I believe this is how, I think once they get them out of the dryer, I don't think they do it wet, They spray down, and they could do it wet, I'm not sure, but they spray down their fabrics, they let them dry, and then they iron them from there. And I believe they iron them instead of pressing. I don't know. Ashley and I talked about this last week. That it's too much trouble for me.
We're both just very excited to get going in the process. And I think, like you said, don't be afraid of the bias edges and don't think you have to do any extra preparation steps, as long as you are, like you said, kind of careful with them and aren't manhandling them around. You should be fine with them when you're pinning and putting the quilt together.
Yeah, and Ashley, when you think about it, you really don't manhandle any of the pieces when you're working with regular squares or rectangles, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't personally. I don't know how you quilt.
I don't. I don't either. I don't manhandle anything, and I don't think most people do. But it's just good to keep in mind what can happen if something stretches out of place on a biased edge.
Absolutely. All right, Sherry wants to know, what size will the blocks be? And then she wants to know what the fabric requirements are, and you can talk about that in a sec too. But she says she's very anxious to get started.
Oh, excellent. Well, Sherry, the blocks are going to be in the center. They're going to be 15.5 inches square. And actually, that'll be before sewing them into the quilt. You'll square them up to 15.5 inches square. There is a patch in the very center. That's what I had. I'm sure if you've seen my quilt, or if you haven't, you'll notice that there's a center patch of fabric, and that's 15 inches square. So we will have, in week 8, we'll have a bonus block. So you can decide, and we ask you, we're going to walk you through that, asking you some questions before you even begin the challenge. Whether you want to make the bonus block or if you want to just keep it with the square in the center. You need to know that because of fabric purchasing.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, I apologize. So
no,
15 inches square, we'll just say give you finished sizes. 15 inches square in the center on the on-point blocks. The ones in the corners are 16 inches finished. Yeah, that's it as far as the blocks are concerned.
Perfect. And then as far as fabric requirements, we are saying, or we're telling everybody, because we've gotten so many questions about this ahead of time. I know everyone is very anxious to get started, but the challenge starts on the 24th, and that is when we are releasing all of the fabric requirements, everything you'll need to complete this quilt, as well as like you said, the information on whether you are going to make the throw size or the bed size. So all of the information you'll need to make this quilt will come out on the 24th when the challenge starts.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Pat would like to know, will there be any special tools needed, like rulers?
I never really recommend anything unless someone asks. There is nothing additional except for a pencil, because we'll be doing half square triangle units. So that's really the only extra anything you'll need. Unless you would like to get rulers, I believe they come in 16.5 inches, if not larger, and then you can use that to trim down your blocks and make sure that your blocks are square. But other than that, there really isn't anything special, just whatever your basic tools are. And Ashley, I mean, that's kind of a good question. Should I put a list together of just basically what I use? And we can send it out to everybody, or include it?
You can, or you can post that on Facebook, just like, or that was actually going to be one of my next questions, or like, what are the tools you can't live without, or what do you always use when you're quilting? Because I know a lot of people have, I know I personally have one ruler that's the only one I use. It's a 2.5 inch by 18 inch, and it's like my favorite one, and that's what I use for everything. And so I feel like some people just kind of have their preferred tools. But if you want to put together something and put it on Facebook that this is what you used specifically for this challenge, so if somebody wants your suggestions on that, that's absolutely something that we would love to have.
Okay. Well, I'll say I've never really been one to be a gadget girl. So the bare bones Supplies is, for the most part, what I use. My ruler that I use, I'll go ahead and share real quick.
Yeah.
The ruler that I use is, I think it's Olfa. What is it? It's either 6 inches wide or 6.5. I can't remember. Let's say 6.5. It must be 6 by 24, I think it is. That's my favorite ruler. And I use that for everything, even if it's something small, because what I like about it is the width and the length. When you apply your hand to whatever you're cutting, even if it's a small, whether it's small or a large piece, you're going to have a lot of stability. Personally, the thinner, shorter rulers, for me, slip too much, and maybe it's just how I hold them down. But so that's what I use. I also use, let's see, 36, what is it, by 24, I think, cutting mat, and 45 millimeter. Is that correct? I think 45 millimeter rotary cutter. So those are my 3 basic tools that I use all the time.
Perfect. And I think that's a good thing to point out. Your ruler size is proportional to your cutting mat size. So like I said, my favorite is the 18 because my mat is only 18 by 24. So for me, it's like, you know, the perfect. So that is a good thing. If you're going to use a larger ruler, you might as well have the cutting mat space to accommodate your ruler.
Yeah, I guess that would be kind of silly using that size on a smaller mat.
Probably. It probably still work, but that's okay. But I do just, we have one more question that came in here, but I want to share just kind of a weird little tip about pencils that I kind of just discovered the other day. So I have Fons and Porter specific quilting marking pencils, and that's what I normally use when I'm marking. So half square triangle, whatever I'm marking. And I didn't have those readily available the other day, so I just grabbed this pencil. It's just your standard like 0.5 millimeter lead. So when you're trying to mark on it, it actually like moves the fabric. So I don't know what it is about, maybe it's a thicker lead or the actual quilting marking pencils are so much smoother on the fabric and they don't like wrinkle your fabric up where like this did. So if you're looking for new tools to buy, I would recommend a legitimate fabric marking pencil as opposed to just your standard everyday pencil.
Yeah, that's true. I have a couple comments on that.
Yeah.
With the mechanical pencils, I found where sometimes that's all I have on my cutting table for whatever reason. And what I do is I just kind of like stroke the fabric down if that's all I have right there. And I'm too lazy to go downstairs and find a real pencil, but I use regular pencils. I just keep regular pencils and sharpener right on my cutting table. And then another thing that I've used in the past are just a very thin line black marker. And you see it much better, especially for anyone who has trouble with their eyesight. I would highly recommend. There's nothing wrong with it. It won't bleed onto any of the parts that are going to show. So that's another option for you. And I would suggest a permanent marker.
Right. Perfect. Awesome. All right. Sandy would like to know, when making a quilt, is the seam always a 1/4 inch?
Yes. Yeah. Just like your basic everyday quilt. The only time that anything can vary is if you're making a mini quilt. You can get away with, and actually it's sort of prudent to go with smaller seam allowances. Or I'm sorry, what I've done in the past is I've sewn the 1/4 inch seam allowances, but I'll trim that just barely before I press any of the seams open, because then you don't have as much bulk.
Right.
So that would be one case. And then the other case would be with applique. I use 1/4 inch seams, but if I'm using, for instance, I worked on David Butler's book, and we did a lot of applique with some really thick fabrics, such as denim, heavy duck, and I made my seams larger than 1/4 inch.
So if you were to make, say, like a baby quilt or something that's entirely out of like minky or fleece or something, would you up the seam allowance for something like that?
You know, that's a really good question. I really have not worked with Minky, but I don't know. That's a really good point. I might consider that. I don't know.
Maybe make it more stable or something. Those larger seam allowance. Yep.
What I would do is I would go to Minky's website and look at some of their patterns and see what they suggest.
Perfect. Yep. And if you're not familiar with, I don't know, I guess what the proper terminology of, I've always called it Minky. I think the actual name of it is called Cuddle Fabric, and I think Minky is the brand name.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but so if you can't find Minky, search for Cuddle Fabric, and I think
both are brand.
Yeah,
I believe. Yeah.
I'm not sure. We'll have to find that out.
Yeah, that's a good thing to find out.
All right, our next question here. This is from Sissy, and she says, "Hi, y'all. Any recommendations for a first quilt type?"
A first quilt type? I would say that if I wonder if she's self-taught. Sissy, would you be able to type in real quick and let us know whether you're self-taught or not? I'm just kind of curious. I would say first-time quilt, just even piecing squares together is fine. And you can even do like 9-patch blocks, sort of to give some variety. So that's a good place to start.
Absolutely. And if you want patterns for 9-patch or 4-patch, or I think 16-patch, disappearing 9-patch, pretty sure we have all of those on our site at National Quilter Circle. So there's definitely some resources there if you want some nice, simple quilt patterns to start out with. But if you want to branch out and start making additional quilt patterns, maybe even intermediate to advanced, you even have a book available. Do you not?
Oh, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah. What kind of patterns do you have in that?
Actually, I do have mine are pretty simple. This is my book, all about strips, colorful quilts from strips of many sizes. I haven't looked at it in a while. I just brought it up today. But anyway, as you can see on the cover, all of my quilts in here, I believe all, are pretty much rectangles and squares that I've done a lot of different things with. Last week, I almost showed this on the back of my sofa, but it got to be a little too busy. I didn't want to scare anybody away. But yeah, most of my quilts are strips. Here's a gray one with, actually, it's just stitch and flip corners. But yeah, most of my quilts are just very geometric and really very easy to make. So thank you.
Sissy just shared that she can sew but has never made a quilt.
Well, I think that's a great place to start. And they can be so darling depending on the fabrics that you have access to. Try and find some whimsical fabrics and even mix in some solids if you wish. And just cut up a bunch of squares and start sewing them together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Della wants to know, will a challenge be available on Facebook or via email?
Actually both. As far as Facebook is concerned, what we're going to do is we're going to direct you to our blog page, correct, Ashley? And you'll be able to get your patterns from the blog page.
Absolutely. Yep. So
you know a little more about the newsletter than I do.
Yeah, so if you've signed up for the block challenge, so each week on Thursdays, you're going to receive the newsletter, and the newsletter will have a link to whichever week of the challenge we're in. So week 1, week 2, it'll have a link right there, and it'll take you to the blog post page, and you can download all of the information you need for that week there. But then Facebook is sort of where you get to interact more with Susan. So she'll be doing the live check-ins. She'll be, interacting with comments, asking and answering questions, those kind of things. So if you just want, I just want the quilt pattern and I want to just make it, you can absolutely do that. Or if you want to interact and be part of our Quilt Block Challenge community, that's definitely the Facebook side. So I highly recommend the Facebook side.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And regarding the videos that I'll be doing them on Thursdays, and I'll be giving some tips so that you have those before you begin. And there'll be videos that even if you're not there live with me, you'll be able to go in at any time and view those videos.
Absolutely. There's a little video tab section at the side. You can click on that and it'll have all of the past videos that she's done on there for sure. So that's another thing that we want to point out too. We know that, you know, everybody's schedule is a bit different and maybe you can't start the challenge right on the 24th. You can start this challenge at any time, whether you're week 1 with us or you're 9 weeks later and you still want to go back and start it, you can do that too. So nothing will disappear. Everything will be there throughout the whole challenge for whenever you're available to work on it.
Yeah, and I'd like to point out, it is a 9-week challenge. So week 9, for those who will be with us for week 9 and making the bed size quilt, you have that whole week where if you have any questions along the way, I'll be checking in on the Facebook page to help you along the way.
Absolutely. Perfect. So I just want to remind anyone, if they're just joining in, that you can ask questions for Susan for about the next half hour or so by typing those into the comment section below the video. But since we're about halfway through, I feel like it's a good time to maybe show a block of the quilt from the upcoming Lexington sampler quilt that is going to be for the upcoming Quilt Block Challenge.
Okay, well, here is, this is going to be for the block for week 2. And it's a really simple star. It really goes together very easily. Actually, all the blocks go together very easily. I'll be giving some tips on like this little patch here, which is in all 4 corners, or I'm sorry, yeah, I guess you could say 4 corners. All 4 corners, that's a stitch and flip. So we will just need 1 patch of fabric here, and I guess I should say 2 patches of fabric. 1 using this fabric and 1 using this fabric. And I just said stitch and flip, and I apologize. What I meant to say was that's half square triangle blocks. So that's all you'll need for those is just 1 of each fabric, and that will make 2, 1 for this block and 1 for your second block. And we'll be making 2 blocks of each block that's in the challenge, except for the bonus block.
Perfect. And that is one thing to point out, that, like you said, it's all blocks go together fairly easily, but you are a fairly experienced quilter. So somebody who's never made a quilt before, are they still going to be able to follow along and be able to make this whole quilt?
Yeah, I believe so. I think that this is really, I think it goes back to us talking earlier about on-point quilts look intimidating, but we're just going to take our time. And that's the biggest thing I recommend to anybody who's a beginner. Just take your time, take it slow, don't get frustrated. And if you find that you're sewing and you start making mistakes, put it all down, walk away from it, and either come back later in the day or come back the next day. That's what I do. And it's really helped me, because if I start cutting something wrong, it's just not worth getting upset over. It's better just to put it down, and that's my sign to say, okay, it's time to walk away from this.
Perfect. I'm gonna throw a little curveball question at you here. But so say if somebody is totally intimidated by the on-point layout design, they don't even want to try and tackle that, can they just make your blocks and put them together in a different layout?
Yeah, absolutely. They can certainly do that. I found through this teaching process of this challenge that I guess it's just my style. I love making a quilt. So you're more than welcome to just make the blocks. And for those of you who just want to make the blocks, let's take, for instance, block number 1. You're going to have the pattern itself. They're going to be like 2-3 pages of the pattern. And then the last page is going to be a coloring page for you. And then in addition to the coloring page, there's going to be spots along the bottom where you can actually staple or tape your your own fabric swatches to that space, and it tells you exactly what to cut from those fabrics.
Perfect.
So it's pretty easy. The only thing I think why I decided not to call this, present this as just a block challenge, is because the corner blocks are an inch larger. So we have 4 blocks out of, let's see, We have 2, 4, 6, 8 blocks in the center, which are 15 inches finished, and then the corner ones again are 16 inches. So to me, it's a little bit more challenging for a beginner to come up with a quilt design using just those blocks.
Perfect.
But, you know, it just a little further, I was thinking about this, that the center blocks, if you end up making the bonus block as well, you're going to have 9 blocks. So you can easily make a quilt from that as well.
A 3x3, yeah, or something like that. So if you were going to do something like that, would you add, say, sashing strips or extra borders, or I guess how would you go about planning out a design, a different design for a quilt?
Let's see, so the center is 10, 20, 30, 45. So I would go ahead and piece those all together. And personally, because each block actually has, the blocks actually in the center are 12 by 12. But on each block, I added a border. So you can even go that route as well. Don't add the border, and you can go with the 12 by 12, and you could do sashing in between the blocks and then add borders, or go ahead and make them as I've instructed and just add a couple of borders onto that. And you could add some interesting borders too, whether it be flying geese or you know, whatever. But ask questions in the group, even, because everybody helps each other. If I'm not able to get to a question right away, I know there's so many talented people in this group that they'll be able to help you as well if I don't get to it.
Absolutely, yes. We have a question here. This is from Tish, and she says that she doesn't understand what a block challenge is, and wants you to please explain that.
Okay. Actually, Ashley has, you've run 2 of them, right, so far?
I'm kind of a silent behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So maybe I should pass that question on to you.
Yeah, so it's just National Quilter Circle runs, we're calling it a quilt block challenge. So it's essentially a 9-week challenge, and each week there's a different block presented, or a different, in this case, portion of the quilt presented. So if you sign up for our, we'll call it the quilt block challenge, week 1, you're going to get your fabric requirements and beginning information, and you'll have a block 1, and then the next week you'll have a block 2, block 3, and you'll work your way through making all of these blocks. And then at the end of the whole challenge, you're going to have a completed quilt. And then you can post pictures on the Facebook page and see everybody else's completed quilts. And so it's just a real fun way to get a new quilt pattern, learn some new quilting techniques, and meet some new quilting friends along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Ashley, I was just thinking that for those people who would decide to just make the blocks, what I would recommend is don't be so concerned about the fabric yardage sheets that will come with the throw size and separately with the bed size quilt. Don't be concerned with those, because you're going to have all the cutting instructions of the patches that you need for, let's say, for instance, week 1 block. You'll have all the cutting instructions from that, and you can base it on that, and then from there, whatever design you end up going with, and it will be your design. I won't be providing any extra designs. Then you can go from there and make your quilt.
Absolutely. Perfect. Our next question here, this is from Joanne, and she wants to know, can we use a layer cake for this challenge?
Yeah, you might be able to. I don't see why not. Maybe I would maybe recommend a couple of them. I haven't done the math, obviously.
You would be, I mean, pieces wise, is in terms of the size of pieces.
Well, if you think about even you know, this block here, this patch here is 3 by 6, so you can get a couple of these patches. So one for this block, one for the duplicate block, out of one 10 by 10 square, out of which is a layer cake. And for those who don't know what a layer cake is a collection of fabrics. So it's usually about 40 to 42 squares come in that collection of fabrics, and you can find those at your local quilt shop or through an online shop.
Absolutely. So like saying, it might be possible, except for I believe your corner triangles, right? They're too big.
The corner triangles. What you mean? Oh, you mean the ones that are
Yeah.
the corner blocks?
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yeah. Those I don't believe you'd be able to get that out of a layer cake because those, I thought they were.
The background, definitely the background of those corners you wouldn't be able to. But actually, you might be able to for one. I mean, for one, you might need 2 layer cakes for that. But
Okay.
I would probably recommend to kind of stay away from the layer cakes unless you're doing just blocks. And if you're doing just blocks, then you can kind of, maybe pull from your stash, or if you don't have a stash, you can then, plan by going to your local quilt shop or going to Joann Fabrics, because they have fabric squares as well, or I'm sorry, fat quarter squares, or triangles, or
layer cakes. They have all kinds of fabric there. They have every type. But I think if you're going to use a layer cake, use it, but then also maybe have a couple, whether it's a yard or whatever, just of maybe actual yardage of fabric, whether that's an accent or a background or just something to go with a layer cake. So there's definitely times where quilts can be made entirely from pre-cut fabrics, like layer cakes or jelly rolls or whatever you want to use. But then I think there's quilts like this one where you're going to need larger pieces and more fabric, that it would probably be a good option to have additional yardage to go with it.
Yeah, the pattern itself was written based off of yardage. There's just, I think, 1 or 2 spots where I say, all you need here is a 4.5-inch square. That's all you need. So, but again, it's like 1 or 2 spots, I think, or one or two fabrics. You really don't need a whole lot. But I would really recommend that if you're going to make either of the quilts, I would go ahead and buy yardage.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I always buy, I mean, I got to make the quilt ahead of time, and you did give me a fabric requirement sheet, and I might have added like an extra half yard to each different color I bought, just so I could have some to store away for later.
And that's smart, especially for those who are just starting out and maybe they don't have a stash. And you can just kind of add that to or start your new stash with it.
Absolutely. All right, our next question here, this is from Rosemary, and she says, when you put the quilt together, do you prefer to hand stitch or freehand stitch? I'm assuming that means machine stitch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I prefer to machine stitch. Yeah.
Have you ever done any hand quilting or anything like that?
Not. Yeah, and I think I touched on this last time when I talked about round robins, and the round robins I was involved in when I first started quilting. There was one woman who made all of her quilts by hand, and all of the rounds she did those all by hand. And I so admired her. And on top of that, and I just remembered this, she had like, I don't know, I think she had like 7 or 10 children. So she was a very busy mom. But what I loved about that is if she would either go to like take the kids to the doctors or something like that, where she's in an office, she's able to do that stitching. So, but no, I've never put a quilt together by hand, and I would love to.
I don't personally think I could have the patience. I don't know. Like we both talked about how we don't even want to pre-wash our fabric. We're just so excited to get started. And so I'm not sure that I could take the time to do that. I mean, possibly I would piece a quilt by machine and then maybe do some hand quilting on it. If it was one that I knew I wasn't going to use that much, just because I guess wouldn't be as confident that my hand quilting would stand up to machine washing per se. So I don't know about that. Put that on the bucket list for maybe sometime.
Right. Well, the other thing I could point out here is that there's, I don't know if it's Bernina. I don't remember what the sewing machine company is, but they make these. I hope I say this right. Sashiko machines.
Sashiko? Or I call it Sashiko.
See, I don't, if it's Sashiko, okay. That's a way to hand quilt, I guess you could say. And it's an Asian technique, I believe. But anyway, there's a machine that does it now. And I saw something recently on I think it was Arafil had something out, just a post, and showed someone who used one of those machines, and it looks like hand stitching, and it's beautiful, really,
Yeah.
really beautiful.
I think so. I believe we have a video on sort of our sister site, National Sewing Circle, where there is something done. I think it's a top that's done with some sashiko stitching. But then we do have a video on National Quilter Circle where one of our other instructors has made a scarf using sashiko style stitching. So she actually does it by hand, because that's originally how it was done, was by hand. And it almost looks like really large, like running stitches. And it's cool because it looks pretty much the same on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good fun technique. Again, another time consuming one, but it looks really cool.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I actually, when I helped David Butler write his book, there's one of the quilts in there. He calls it Boro, Boro, and Boro quilts are traditional Japanese, I believe, quilts. Really, that started from the farming community, and what they did was they took, used fabrics, clothing. In pieces, and they would just layer them. They would continue to layer them, and they just did that in and out stitching, and that's how they stitched the fabric to whatever the base it was of their quilts.
Huh, that's interesting. Almost like a quilt as you go kind of thing, where you're layering it together. Perfect.
Really, and I ended up making the quilt that's in his book, and it was pretty time consuming, but I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed doing hand stitching though.
Perfect. Now, I know you have a couple quilts behind you that's on your couch, and then you have obviously a different quilt on your couch last month, and you've already showed us another quilt that you've made. We had this question a while ago, but I thought it was a good one, so I'm going to ask it to you again. As somebody who has made dozens and dozens of quilts, what do you do with them once you've made them? Do they just pile up somewhere?
Upstairs. No, you know what? Yeah, I do have a lot. I've given a lot to family. Really, mainly family I've given quilts to, but I do have a lot still because I've made a lot of quilts for magazines in the past. And so, yeah, I'm really trying to find homes for them though, because they need to be used. And I was thinking, this one that's over my left shoulder, it's one of my favorites. It was in McCall's Quilting, and I've never washed it. I just pulled it out of my stack today because I thought it would go nicely with all of the red and cream. And I really need to start using it because this is one I won't give away. It was always one of my favorite. I actually based the design is just really simple, and if anybody out there would love to design their own quilts, one place for inspiration that I found, and that's where I got the inspiration for this one, was all of the vintage and antique quilts on eBay. I happened to see an image of one, and I really loved it. And I loved the real thick sashing on this one, and so I just sort of recreated it.
Perfect. So speaking of somebody wanting to design quilts, you've mentioned that obviously you have a book that you've done, you have designed for magazines, you've worked for magazines. If there's somebody out there that's sitting there thinking, man, I wish I could do that, how do you go about doing that?
Well, what we did at McCall's is we had on the website, there's a place that you can go, and I think it's under the About Us, and it's probably with any of the magazine companies. Go to their website. There's usually a place there, and they have their a list of guidelines, and read through those, and you can find out exactly what they require. Some may accept electronic files. Some may accept those as well as actual photographs mailed. Because even though we're all in the world of technology these days, we used to get so many entries via regular snail mail.
So that's all you have to do is sort of put together, either a quilt you've already made and have photos of it, or maybe just, hey, here's a design idea I had, and just sort of submit that in, and they'll either say yes or no, we'd like you to make this for us, and kind of go from there.
I would recommend that if you are a first-time submitter of your quilts, I would have a finished quilt to give, because it's really hard to see. We used to get designs in that were just really out of this world, but they would be digital files, and we need to know how that person can sew. And you really have to kind of nail those points, any star points. You really have to be able to nail those and not have them cut off. That goes back to what I always say is take it slow. If you want to end up designing, take your sewing slow. Master hitting your points on your star points when you go to piece blocks together, and you'll be fine. And it goes by a lot quicker than you think if you're continually working on projects.
Yes, absolutely. No, never. Speaking of designing, just because I have designed a couple quilts, that's it. But I used to just sort of sketch things out on graph paper, and I recently started using EQ, which is what you use, and you are like a teacher for that, right? You design with that?
Yeah, I've designed with EQ since, really since I started. I think I purchased it in 2004, the software, and I've just been using it ever since.
Can you just explain a little bit about what it is in terms of like how you actually get to put a quilt together using it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So you purchase the software, you download that on, and now you can, I don't even know if they have it the way that I bought it initially, because I just usually purchase any updates if there's a new version. But you can, I believe you can just go to their website, you can download right from their website, and it comes also, and you probably know this better than I do because you just got it, didn't you, not too long ago?
Yeah, yep.
And it comes with instructions, comes with a guidebook, an online guidebook, and it just, there are lessons in the front. And I know when I started, it was funny, I got burnt out. I mean, it just really fried me. You really have to take your time because I had never used a software program like it before. And just take your time, go through all of the lessons. And if you have any questions, they always encourage you. You're more than welcome to get in touch with them directly and just ask your questions through, I think they have some sort of a customer service email. And they really are very helpful in walking you through any questions that you have.
Absolutely. I have to say my favorite part of using it so far has been being able to see colors go into a design, as opposed to, like you mentioned, you are going to provide a coloring sheet with each block of the quilt. And I have done that before too, but then it's kind of a bummer if you like color it all in and then you don't like it. It's a lot easier in a computer program to just change the color than it is to erase it or start all over. So if you're serious about getting into designing quilts or want to, take your quilt designing to the next level, that's definitely something to look into, is some kind of quilt design software.
Yeah, definitely. And that's how I came up with the way that I color quilts, to make sure that they're balanced. And I do talk about this, not at length, but I do talk about it in my book. I would like one of these days to write another book and perhaps touch on color a lot more, and discuss fabric, putting fabrics together and putting color together and that sort of thing. But it's really nice because the EQ program does come with preloaded swatches that you can play with immediately. So prints as well as solids.
Absolutely.
So really great.
Speaking of colors, just because the quilt you showed us, the Lexington sampler is kind of red and cream, and the one behind you is kind of red and cream. Do you have a favorite color?
I don't.
It's not red and cream?
No, it's really not. The one behind me, the red and cream one behind me, that was in a McCall's Quilting, and I made it big enough. I was kind of selfish, and I thought, I'm going to make this big enough for my king size bed. So we use this on our king size bed. I do love the designer of the red and cream quilts, the one that is going to be in the challenge as well as this one, and that's French General. And I'm going to touch real quickly on the fabrics in the quilt for the challenge. Those are not available. I do not kit quilts personally. That's not part of my business model. These fabrics, we were nice, or Moda was kind enough to let us use these fabrics and show them off before they're even going to be in stores. These fabrics will be in stores this August-September timeframe. So even if you would love to make the throw now and decide to make the bed-size quilt later because you love these fabrics so much, I'd encourage you to do so.
Well, and then this is something that fabric designers do quite often, right? To sort of preview their fabrics and sort of pre-showcase it almost. But like you mentioned, this is a specific line of fabric, but they do have similar prints. So if you want to sort of mimic the look of what you have, that's still an option, right?
Yeah, I think it's very doable. French General has been around for a while, and the gal who designs, it's her company, she's come up with several different collections that are red and cream, and Moda also sells basics. A lot of times Moda, what they'll do is what they do is pre-sell collections. But with any of the more popular prints that they have been keeping them in stock. So that's another way that you can find these fabrics through your local quilt shops, because a lot of them do carry the basics from the French General collections.
Perfect. And now I know we're not going to give away too many hints on fabric requirements and things like that, but we do have, like you mentioned, 2 different sizes of quilts and 2 very different color versions of the quilts. So you don't have to be, say, limited in your color selection, right? You can sort of pick whatever you want.
Right. If you are going to be doing the challenge, before you begin, I have 2 different, I have instructions for those who are making the throw and instructions for those who are making the bed-size quilt in week 1. And I give a lot of tips and suggestions on fabrics. So make sure you read through that before you even purchase fabrics, because there might be something in there that might be helpful in how you select your fabrics.
Absolutely. All right, we just got a question here from Ada, and I want to make sure I understand it completely. So if I get this wrong, please correct me. But she said that she made a baby blanket, and she wanted to know if the quilting should be added after you finish the blanket or not. So I'm thinking, do you generally quilt before finishing with binding and stuff like that, or can you go back and add quilting after a blanket has been finished?
Well, you actually can. I mean, if you put the binding on, and as long as you have everything stabilized, you can. And I would say I would want it to be stabilized with the spray, the basting spray, because nothing will budge. But you can. I've done that before, where I've sandwiched a quilt, I've put the binding on, and then I've quilted it. But it's always a smaller piece. If I shouldn't say always, because that sounds like I do it many times, but I don't. I think I've done it maybe once or twice. You can do it. It's really your choice whether you want to do that or not. I would say a larger quilt, I wouldn't suggest doing it. And I really even can't give you a solid reason why, but I wouldn't do it.
I agree. I feel like if it was the larger the quilt, the more chances for puckers and things towards the edges. But if it is a larger quilt and maybe you thought you were done, but then you stand back and you look at it and there's maybe a couple little spots where additional quilting could look fine, I think that's an area where you could absolutely go back in and add it in, because you're not going to be sort of worried about any fullness or anything working its way to the edges.
Yeah, I think that's really a great suggestion, Ashley. Yeah.
Perfect. I want to talk a little bit about quilting, because a lot of people only do quilting. A lot of people only do piecing. Some people do piecing and quilting. What is your thoughts on whether or not you have to quilt your own quilt, or Can you send it to somebody else and have them finish it for you?
Mhm.
Like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I think we kind of chatted about this last time, and I don't quilt my quilts. I would say most of the time I do not quilt my own quilts. I've only quilted a handful of quilts myself. Typically, I don't have time to do it, and I'm usually working on a deadline. And quite frankly, even as skilled as I've become, I've been intimidated by it. But I don't want to say that and scare anyone away because, you know, it's just I haven't really had time to pour into it. And I think if you have the time and you're interested in it, go for it. You know, one thing that I do want to mention, as you were talking about that, we hear quilting, and quilting can be synonymous with piecing. You know, we can say, "Oh, I quilt," and that's just sort of like a general term. But there, in addition to it being a general term, quilting is the act of taking your quilt top, your backing, and your whatever type of batting you're going to use, and create a sandwich out of that. And then joining those that sandwich together with a sewing machine is quilting as well. So it can get a little confusing. And if anyone is confused out there ever, just you know, send us a message or ask your local quilt shop, like, what do they mean by quilting? I thought quilting was this. So just to clear things up a little bit for you, I would ask somebody, whatever the
Absolutely.
situation is.
And I would also point out, you don't feel like you have to be the one to quilt your quilt. I love quilting, but I love piecing. I don't like quilting as much. Like, I just, once it's pieced, I'm like, perfect, it's done. Like, that's where I like to end. So I like to be able to do the design part of all the different colors and little pieces and put all that together, but I'm not necessarily one that likes to do the actual stitching, quilting part. So don't feel like you have to do both parts.
Yeah, very, very true. And you know, there's a certain skill to doing the actual quilting when you're done with your quilt. There is a skill to it, and but you can teach yourself how to do it if you're interested.
Absolutely. The next question here, I'm not sure if you're going to be familiar with this fabric, but it's a question about Alaska, so I have to ask it. But Ruth says that my daughter bought me fantastic fabric called Northern Lights when in Alaska. Would it be suitable for this challenge?
Northern Lights. Okay, I guess is that a brand?
Well, I used to live in Alaska, so I'm thinking Northern Lights are, they're the greens and the purples and really sort of wispy. So I'm assuming that that's kind of what it looks like. So if you had to say, would like an ombre fabric or something like that be
Okay.
suitable for this challenge?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can absolutely use those. I think it would be a really great challenge for your creativity to use those types of fabrics. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'm wondering if that's Northcott, because I know Northcott does a lot of really interesting fabrics, and it sounds like something maybe they would do. But
Probably.
yeah, I would say absolutely try it.
Perfect. Ruth, I want to put out a request that you make this quilt and then out of that fabric and then post pictures of on the Facebook page because we really want to see the Northern Lights fabric.
That would be very cool. I'll have to look it up after I get off.
Yeah. Okay, so we have about a minute left. So I just want to remind everybody that if you want to join National Quilter Circle Quilt Block Challenge and make the Lexington sampler quilt, to sign up, you can do that by, I believe we even have a banner probably on the top of the page you're on right now to watch this video. You can do it on the website, do it on the Facebook page. And just to kind of leave them with the quilt, do you want to show just one more block real quick?
Oh, sure, I could do that. Let's see. Actually, this is block number 1. Let's see if I can get it in the. This is week 1. And it again, it's a pretty simple block to put together. And you can get really, really interesting and creative with it, whether it be solids, a lot of different colors of solids. But if you're doing prints, I would just recommend that you kind of look at the quilt, and if you're not really quite sure what to use for your prints, and see how this print here in the center is a little bit larger, and then these on the side, the cream and tan dot. I love dots, so I like to put dots almost wherever or whenever I'm quilting. So notice how this is lighter. It has sort of a cross or plus design to it. And I used a darker fabric on the outside of it just to sort of make this center pop a little bit. So there's a lot of different variations that you can make of this, and I can't wait to see them all.
Absolutely. We can't wait to see either. So especially if you are joining the Facebook group page for the quilt, post pictures of your quilts so we can see them as they're finished. And we will see more from Susan starting the 24th. She'll be checking in weekly with our videos for that. So we'll see you back on the 24th. And thank you so much for being here tonight, Susan.
Oh, thank you. And thanks everybody for writing in your questions. And I look forward to doing the challenge with you.
Perfect. Everyone have a good night.
All right.